as well.
Thank you.
And make sure that we've got, for folks that are just joining in or haven't joined in a while, we've been recording a lot of our governance and our profiling discussions. And from the profiling perspective, it's particularly helpful because as we're now working through our community issue log and looking for more editors, we're using our recordings as a way of while we actually work through problems in JSON to try to build capacity and comfortability with folks who want to be able to actually kind of look at what we did and copy that into the same types of changes that we're asking them to do offline. So if you're interested in, you'll see a number of those recordings on our YouTube channel. I usually get them up like an hour or so after we close out. Primarily it's governance, but we've started to be a little bit better on the profiling side as well. Anything else folks want to see added to the agenda? All right. Cool. So, as you can tell, this is kind of more late breaking news because I have only had a chance to try to get the most kind of high level details in this. For folks that may be newer or coming back to this conversation, we've had a lot of back and forth over the last, I want to say like 8-9 months with the folks who are working on that pan-Canadian health data content framework, and with the kind of emergence of the CA core as this kind of bubbling new set of standards we might have to work with in the future, about how the CA baseline fits in as a base into that work. And so I was trying before the meeting to pull up the presentation links that previously Joel and Shannon O'Connor from FHIR were able to kind of work through in terms of this was the approach. I will have them before next Friday. We want to have, like I said, that kind of fuller update on the 24th, so a week from now. But effectively, for folks that have seen that deck or haven't, the way that we understand the kind of the CA baseline as kind of these minimal shared constraints that as a community we've been able to identify across our guides, feeding into this work of the framework and the core profiles, was that it would be kind of this initial input, and it would be one of multiple inputs, in that the constraints that we had in the baseline combined with consultations, combined with other standards and a number of kind of other contributing factors would drive what would be the constraints in the underlying kind of information and the underlying data models that get put out through this pan-Canadian health data content framework. And many of you may already actually be kind of contributing or part of some of the target review groups that will start receiving content from the framework either already or in the coming days. But the idea was that the CA baseline has been looked at extensively, and that the CA core, like a set of profiles, would be in alignment with that framework, but that kind of would be in a more maybe linear fashion. And that's presented kind of a challenge when we started asking the question from a baseline perspective of like, how can our community with the lens of profiling contribute? If we kind of have to wait for this to be done before we could really look at this. And so the folks at CIHI, the folks at InfoWay have been kind of working together on this integrated plan to try to figure out, are there ways that we can do more kind of iterative rounds of development and collaboration? So, folks like Joel and Joni, folks like myself, folks like Shannon O'Connor, who isn't here today, she's coming back from partnership, have been advocating for, can we get earlier views? It means more cycles for folks who are putting out the framework and who are trying to put it into profiles. But it was really important to the community to try to get an earlier look at the content, even though we know that largely the framework, we need the framework as an input to have those profiles made. So very recently, we were able to kind of work out a reasonable round of iterations that we think will allow us to have kind of enough of an early view into a subset of the what would become a subset of CA core profiles. So things like patient, practitioner, maybe organization, for a very early kind of iteration and look at how does this process work. So we're hoping, because many of you are kind of also working with the same crew on the patient summary rollouts, that we can maybe get some of these profiles into the hands of communities like ours to provide that early feedback, to help with this positioning in that same kind of January timeframe that we're looking to do the PSCA. So kind of still hot off the presses, and we'll want to talk about, you know, the degree of interest that the CA baseline profiling and governance group have in providing this kind of early feedback, looking at the profiles, kind of examining the process that we're using. But I know it's something we've been asking for a while, so I didn't want to wait any longer in sharing that. I think we're in a really good place to actually get some views in, and we can probably, from a governance perspective, think about how can we provide the most kind of targeted and efficient inputs into this process. So I'll ask for questions. I don't know if I can answer them all, but like, are there any that are preliminary that you want to talk about from a teaser perspective before we dig in more next Friday? Are folks excited? Are they dismayed? Are they apathetic about this? I'm hoping not apathetic, because one thing I will say is that to get content into our hands faster, it means that it's a lot more work on a lot of people to be able to do this, but it was important because our community said it was important for us to kind of have this early engagement.
Early engagement sounds like a good idea to me.
Agreed. I don't know if excited is exactly the word I'd use.
Ready, maybe? I don't know. Like, I feel like we've been kind of saying, can we see it in a profile? Can we see it in a profile for a while now? So I know I'm excited to have this be a little bit more tangible. But
yeah.
Sorry, Mukesh, what was that?
It's just good to see, yeah, kind of, but don't know much.
Good. Okay.
Yeah, it is.
Well, now
you.
Sorry, go ahead. What was that?
No, I said thank you for to know. So what is going on?
And for other folks, like, we'll have kind of a week to chew on it. The goal is to give kind of a little bit more of that in-depth, more kind of, I don't want to say formalized, but to have some chance to chew on it and to talk through what that means for us come January. But at least now you folks know what I know, and can maybe start drumming that drum of excitement, because I think it's what we've been asking for. So, all right. With that in mind, just because I do want to make sure that we do have a chance to talk through that more profiling kind of community issue log item, and with process in mind, one of the things that we've been doing, you guys can see my screen, right? The community issue log progress updates.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. I just want to make sure. So one of the things that we've been doing very recently process-wise in our attempts to get more progress in our community issue log is by kind of giving these updates once we at the beginning of all our profiling stream sessions on what we've been able to accomplish so far on the things that we've marked as ready to be applied, giving you some insight on if there's anything that's kind of still remaining in review. And I added this one in this week, Elliot, because you've been very helpful the last week or two getting some additional QA tickets in. But trying to kind of outline if we have any new tickets that have been introduced in the issue log since we last chatted. So huge thanks to Arthur None, Piers Hollett, and Elliot Silver for the work that you guys have done in the last, I want to say, 3 to 4 weeks on getting through some of our kind of outstanding changes that needed to be applied, assisting with the QA process, I think this is probably the most issues that we've been able to work through in a condensed period, and maybe since we started, which has been huge for a lot of the folks that submitted those issues to be able to actually see, you know, months later, it was addressed and it has been closed out. So huge thank you for that big lift. I know we're all still learning this process, but it has made it so that we are moving the needle finally. There is one that I've got to check out in terms of, like, we've got one outstanding one that is a pull request that we're just doing review on still. And there's a few new kind of QA tickets that are coming out of Elliot's review of some of the new IG publisher errors and warnings that have been added to the log since. So I think let me actually pull up our issue log so you folks can see what I'm seeing. So we've got a good deal of issues from our, I'll do this one, from our like statuses that were previously ready to be applied, moved over to change applied. We still do have a considerable amount that are outstanding. So I think a few of these are maybe on me that I've identified, but if there's any folks that are interested in tagging themselves towards one of these or just picking it off the issue log, I will put it into the chat now. I'm going to pull one of these to date for us to actually kind of work through, but if you can even just comment if you're interested in working on it, then others will know kind of not to work on it in their branches as well. The ones that I pulled for today's discussion. So the last time we met, well, actually 2 times ago, we started this discussion on diagnostic report, and we made a community decision that the cardinality constraints on diagnostic report effective was too strong for our scope and our principles from the CA baseline perspective, and that there were a lot of cases that or enough use cases that we were able to identify where that cardinality restriction was too stringent. And then we kind of closed that out. We said, yep, let's make that change. And we were left with a remaining decision about whether or not we do anything about the must support, whether on that same element. And so we started a conversation last profiling call around what we want to do to resolve it. I'll put that in the chat. So it's 2487 for folks that are interested. And our goal today, I want to be able to close out this discussion, because we said we're going to give folks that 2-week period to think about the degree of impact that this might have on their systems for us to maintain the must support, and specifically if there were reasons and rationales we wanted to maintain it. And then I've got a couple other ones that one pulled out here that we can talk through from a decisioning perspective. And then I'd like to be able to walk through an example of how we resolve issues that are around us needing to declare slicing, which is one of the common QA items I think that Elliot had raised in some of his new tickets. So the hope of walking through it once with you folks so that we can then break off and actually start making some of those similar changes in the outstanding tickets that reference the same issue. So I am going to pull up 2487 and we will pick up where we left off. So I think I'm here. So for just framing real quick, we have 2 diagnostic report profiles, one that is for results reporting. So oftentimes we think about this as being kind of more like laboratory results focused, and then one that is more notes based that we haven't seen a lot of use or feedback around yet. Today, we're talking about a constraint that is applied in the results and kind of lab related diagnostic report profile. So if I go over to the overview, what we'll see, and so this change is kind of pending. It's been like we've decided we're going to remove it, but we haven't actually finished pushing it out because we were going to do them both at the same time. But you can see kind of our base state was that we had this strict expectation around effective, where it was minimum cardinality and must support. When we started talking about use cases where effective really wasn't used all that much, it was around behaviors, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it was around behaviors where dates around when the specimen was collected being much more meaningful than like the diagnostic report in itself. And so where we landed was definitely the minimum cardinality seems too strong, but the must support, we kind of went back and forth about whether or not we would keep it, because if we had an optional cardinality, it would mean that essentially we're just asking systems to say, you know, downstream, you may be expected to demonstrate your ability to support diagnostic report .effective. And so we really have kind of one second, actually, I'm in the wrong one. It's this one. So we looked on the last call, we said, okay, there are guides out there like US Core that do actually have, while they're not cardinality restrictive, they have other types of restrictions, meaning they have invariants that make sure that effective gets populated for EMRs and data sources in the states that are adherent to US Core. But to some of our users, like certain lab systems or centralized lab repositories, that invariant may not make sense for their current set of use cases. So we looked at legacy data, which is also something that we consider whenever we're looking at whether or not a constraint is appropriate, and identified that like there still really wasn't great definitive mappings that isolated diagnostic report effective in those OBR and ORC segments from HL7V2.8.2. So what we said is, we think that it's possible that the legacy is going to be a bit messy in this area. And if mappings aren't in place, then a must support may carry additional burden. But folks asked to flip this on its head and instead ask whether or not we had a really clear business reason to continue having the must support there. Like if what we're saying is there is a need and a driver to maintain it. So the homework from 2 weeks ago was, if you have an opinion and you think there's a clear business reason for its inclusion or can come up with one on the spot, let's highlight. Because if we don't have that, then it might be something more so to consider relaxing in the meantime and highlighting it to, for instance, initiatives like the framework, in order to consider it kind of more in depth. But as it stands, we've kind of heard two nays, two reasons why we might not keep it. And we want to make sure that we're evaluating clear business reasons we would before we make a decision to remove the must support flag or not. So, having mulled on it, is there any reason, like, what would be a business rationale for the baseline in particular, maintaining it as a must support flag?
Yeah, so I feel like relying more on the specimen reporting data, the specimen collection date, makes a lot of sense. But then because of the cardinality of specimen, what if you have multiple specimens, or what if you don't have a specimen? You know, I mean, that's the imperative behind having an effective data set. It is definitive because it is at the report level. But I don't know if that justifies must support.
So let's take a look. So you're saying basically, if we've got oops. In our instances, so in the actual records that would be adherent to these rules, if you've got multiple specimens that are referenced within the diagnostic report, that it provides a singular point of this is the meaningful date to know among the two, or among the options.
Yeah, I'm saying that, but I don't really necessarily believe that, because I mean, in my business case, there is a single specimen and it is more reliable when it was collected as an effective date. So yeah, that's the only justification I can think of for having something which is definitive at the report level as a date, is just that it's really conclusive then.
Rita, I see your hand up.
Yeah, if you have multiple specimens, like a urine and a stool, the stool can be collected like 2 days after the urine. So what would be the effective date for your diagnostic report? Like, they wouldn't have the same, you'd have 2 different effective dates. Because reference-wise, the stool could be collected after you took your medication.
Yeah, and I think that's the point earlier about it creates some potential burden, right? Because then you have to have some roll-up logic for which date you're going to use preferentially, or do you and it, do you or it?
That's right.
I mean, based on that, I would put my hand up and say, yeah, I don't think we really need much support either.
It's just that basically doesn't, whether it's more support or not, it doesn't, that problem doesn't go away. If you've got multiple samples and they got different dates, you got to create a rule to say which date you're going to use, no matter whether you have much support or not.
So really, it's the observations that are linked to the effective date, because it's these observations on the stool that are linked to the date that the stool was collected, and the observations on the urine that are linked to the date so it doesn't sort of belong here if you have multiple specimens on a diagnostic report effective date, because there isn't one effective date for the multiple observations on different specimens on this diagnostic report.
I guess it depends what this effective date's supposed to represent. Supposed to be the date that the report is correct or active or whatever.
Now, if you look at the
So the
definition,
definition,
yeah,
Or is it for
Exactly.
the-
look at the definition.
So then it's just when the report was written. So that's going to be the date you
No.
did it,
no,
isn't it?
No, effective
Oh,
date
it's-
is the time when the subject of the report is a patient. This is usually either the time of the procedure or of specimen collections. So it's really the specimen collections that define the effective date. And that is the clinically relevant date. Is the date that the specimen was collected.
and because it can be a period, if you've got multiple collections over an extended period of time, then you can just record that it was over that period.
So if you got multiple samples, you would really use a period instead of a date.
Let's take a look at, did we constrain the date time down for that one then? Because it's a choice, but maybe we did the wrong thing in constraining that out. So let's just take a look at actually what it looks like from the JSON perspective. Oh, okay, interesting. So yeah, periods there.
So then that's what you would use. If you have multiple samples, use the range from the first up to the last, basically. In my opinion, anyways, but
Do you think though it should be, are we saying that the default behavior for a multiple specimen use case is to populate something ineffective for diagnostic report, and that's why we're having a must support here? Or is it just a modeling choice that some people make and some people don't?
It might be just a process that some people use and some don't to say when the report's effective. I mean, in the past, when you didn't do electronically, you'd do all these different tests, and once you compiled them together, you'd send it off to the doctor to go for them to look at. And so that date, they would all come at once, or they'd come separately as completely independent things. So it depends on the process, right?
Is there like an argument for, or maybe an example of folks needing to demonstrate or using effective meaningfully when there is a single specimen? Rita, I see you've got your hand up.
Oh, sorry, it's still up from before. It didn't go down.
What I'm trying to gauge is the only business justification for having this must support one use case among the many for how diagnostic report is modeled? Like if it's not helpful for a diagnostic report that sits over a single specimen that already has an effective date, should we maintain the must support on it?
Going from the kind of responses I've heard on similar things from our business people on stuff like working with the patient summary stuff, when you start making it says, well, if there's more than one sample, we put this date, and if there isn't, then we don't. It makes the processing logic more complex, because then you have to go and count how many samples you got to see whether or not you should have a date there. Not saying it's right or wrong, it's just that was the concern. It was more difficult to process when you had that, because you had to check for the options either way every time it comes in. So having a consistent approach makes things easier for the implementation, I guess is the way to put it.
To really rely on diagnostic report effective being populated. Is that kind of what you're inferring, Randy?
Trying to read it, it's a little small on my screen. There we go.
So while it may be less meaningful for
I wouldn't just say necessarily less meaningful, it'd be more like duplicated information. Because realistically, if you only got a single case, this date's going to match the sample date.
And so, like, how many of us are participating in processes that do this today? Or would this be a lift that by maintaining the must support on effective, we'd be incurring on our Canadian implementers?
I don't think this matters whether you do must support or not, but this kind of approach is generally what you want to do in these spots. You don't really want, the less conditional filling of elements you have, the better.
Oh my gosh, sorry. This is, I don't know why this always does that. So it's reducing conditionality.
Yeah.
So how do we feel about this, folks? I mean, have we convinced ourselves about keeping must support? or not so much? Is there risk to us removing it and, for instance, highlighting as an opportunity for like the data capture models to identify whether or not it should be consistently applied, right? Reducing the conditionality through those more upstream mechanisms. I think one risk I can see is that if through, because diagnostic report in labs is part of the patient summary. And if through the patient summary efforts, we realize a lot of folks aren't utilizing diagnostic report effective in their lab data and their systems aren't prepared to support it as senders, that maintaining the must support in the CA baseline would mean that it's another opportunity for us to digress from PSCA if PSCA determines, you know, it's not enough jurisdictions that are participating can support this. And I think we have, is it OLIS that doesn't have a must support on diagnostic report effective?
That's right, OLIS does not.
But in my opinion, I think it'd be okay to not make it to remove the must support. But I would, you know, like say this conditionality stuff. But that's just the general case rather than the specifics.
Is there a compromise that gets us at trying to promote the behavior that we think is preferable, but not necessarily applying a demonstrable constraint on it?
If it was R5, we could be using the new, should support or something like that.
Well, we do have a section we started to do in our pages for items that we really deliberated on for a while that were must support and that we deliberated and determined, you know, maybe it's more of a should support. So even if it's not computable, like it might be something that we have the option of having in our page narrative. We've done it in a couple other examples. What do folks think of that? Do we like it better or worse than keeping the flag on must support? Keeping the flag on diagnostic report. Keeping the flag on effective. Sorry, it's a long week.
I
Does
like
any,
it less.
you like it less than keeping the must support flag?
Well, I would rather either choose to keep the flag or not keep the flag, rather than put it in text.
What do folks think about that? And if we don't have an answer now, what more do we need to know in order to make a decision?
I think unless across the board, everybody should be putting an effective date in their diagnostic report, you should not put must support on there. And since we cannot say across the board, everybody will be putting an effective date there. Since we cannot say that, we cannot put the must support there.
Anyone disagree?
Reasonable argument.
What I'm trying to get at is whether or not someone is gonna like raise the motion for us to make a change or not make a change, one way or the other. Or if folks think we still need to talk through this more. Would there be, so Rita, if you were, so you're coming from the argument of, in the past, when we've identified cases where a must support is not present through our due diligence reviews, we have removed the flag. Is there anyone that kind of seconds? I know, Elliot, you said it's a reasonable argument, but what I'm really trying to drive to is like we need to make a decision and have follow through here.
So is Rita moving to remove must support?
Yes, yes.
I'll second.
Do we need any further discussion on this topic before we ask for the vote? All right, I will first ask for who will vote. So I'm gonna just, because this is something we're trying to get through these stalemates. So the action item from Rita is remove the must support on diagnostic report effective. Given it is not considered MS across other Canadian implementation guides. Okay. We've got 9 folks. So we have a motion, a second. Would anyone vote? I can't remember. We do negative first, right? Negative.
I believe the proper way is abstain first.
Abstain first. So does anyone want to abstain from the vote? Does anyone want to vote negatively against the motion to remove the must support flag? Okay, that's 9 yays then. Beautiful. We now have an action item that can be actioned for diagnostic report effective. Do I have any volunteers for who is willing to remove the must support flag?
I'll take it.
I don't know, you might have to battle out with Arthur. I saw you guys came in at the same time.
Arthur, if you want it, it's yours.
All right, I will mark it as ready to change. Beautiful. Okay. The next one. So we finally got through the 3-weeker, the diagnostic report effective. And I've got another one on practitioner role general profile. Let's take a look and then you guys can tell me whether or not you'd rather make a decision on this one or whether you want to, okay, it is practitioner role, whether you want to move to actually performing the change from another issue. So this particular issue is on practitioner role general. I'll put it in the chat. And it's similar in that basically we have a constraint from a Canadian implementation guide that is different than our expectation that we have in the baseline. And so we've got a use case coming out of one of the lab implementations that uses practitioner role to effectively just communicate the information about a ordering practitioner. And because of that, doesn't use code or specialty. So it's not considered must support. It's not considered something that would have minimum cardinality, and there isn't an invariant applied to it. When we look at, let me see the JSON, it might just be showing up there. I thought we had for practitioner role, this was that we had an invariant that enforced either code or specialty. But actually we might have removed that from I'm not seeing it. And so we might have removed it via another issue in the past. I should have scanned this a little bit better, because basically in the baseline, what we've done is said, okay, here's our kind of preferred bindings if you're populating one or the other, but there's no minimum cardinality, no must support, and I think the prior invariant has been removed. So actually this one might be easy enough to remove. Did I get that right, Rita? That the use case is essentially like it doesn't really utilize either.
No, we don't have code or specialty
Okay.
in our practitioner role. Because basically we just want to identify a practitioner at a certain institution with possibly a contact number. Because we want to know where to send the report to. And this is mostly for practitioners who work in multiple places. So if you identify Dr. Doe, you need to know where to get a hold of Dr. Doe to send the report, to ask questions. You don't really care what kind of doctor he is. You just want to be able to get a hold of him to discuss the results or the order with him. So the only thing that we require on a practitioner role is the practitioner in the organization. And it's all gone.
Yeah. Our folks, so with that in mind, I don't actually think it's an issue anymore. Are folks comfortable, anyone uncomfortable with the action item to just make sure that we track down the prior issue log item, note it here just for our own due diligence that it didn't get removed accidentally, which I don't think it was, but I want to make sure we close out that ticket. Okay. So then I guess I answered my own question of should we do one or the other, because we can now look at the one that should be ready to actually work through as a change. So this was a issue on some of the extensions that use slicing but don't declare it. So let me pull up the example on my end. And I think, am I right, Elliot? You found a couple of these as well? Maybe not even in the extensions, but like in other.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to pull up. I know from Lloyd's note, it's an extension. I'm going to look for Aboriginal Identity Indicator. And we're going to pull that bad boy up. All right, so I think this is, so let's take actually a look at it real quick in the actual project. Okay. So I think the idea is that maybe it even isn't rendering correctly. That there is, okay, I see it now. I think the idea is that when we have an extension and we jump right into URL and value coding, and we jump right into the first slice before declaring the actual, like giving a parent element, like extension value, like identifying the discriminator and like providing that structure around it. Right now, the IG publisher and some of the validation is flagging that where it previously did not, that we've got to basically declare that slicing structure ahead of time. So let me see. Basically, what I can see is we're saying we want value coding, and then we claim the type. Interesting. And then we also have a slice name of value coding. Can we solve this without, like, by removing a slice name here?
Mm,
Because we're actually just saying we are constraining down to value coding. I think, yeah. Let me see if I can find another one too. Another one that might actually have some of the okay, so here's one where you've got multiple data type choices that isn't sliced. And it's basically saying you've got this type of Boolean or you have this type of date. I'm not going to go further into the slicing is what was happening in deceased. With this one, what's attempting to be done is to clarify some coding and display and system expectations if coding is used. Is that how other people are reading it? Where it's to say other values can be supported, but if you're using value coding, then you have to meet these expectations.
I'm not sure about this one. I'm just looking for. Another example.
That's a good one. Because, like, I think they have two ways to solve it, right? And forgive my slicing on the fly because it's my least favorite thing in FHIR. But I think it has the potential to look something like, is it slice? I'm going to have to actually pull up an example to get the syntax. What do we slice? Let me pull up patient. Okay. Do this. I'm going to pull up element definition. Slicing, then discriminator. Okay. So effectively, what we're trying to discern is, do we apply a traditional slicing parent or do we just limit the data type option? If we want to apply the essentially the element with the slicing structure, then what we would do is kind of follow a very similar expression of these elements that we're seeing in our identifier use case. So we've got slicing, discriminator. The type is saying, like, are you following a pattern? Are you looking for a certain value? And then what is the path of the element you're caring about? So in patient identifier, we're saying, well, the slicing is it's asking you to check for a pattern that is expressed on the dot type element. So as in, if you supply JHN and you supply, I think it's this system, then so this system, and you supply JHN as the type, then it's evaluated as meeting the expressed slice. So I'll talk it through we'll just talk through whether or not, or what that would effectively look like in this case. So we've got value, right? And we've got a slicing that's been applied, and the slicing is being done. It's off of a data type. Let's take a look.
I'm not sure about this issue.
About whether or not we should be constraining down to like using a method other than slicing, or the discriminator that we would use for slicing.
I'm not sure we need slicing.
Yeah. Maybe it's one. Let me see if there's another one in our extensions that, because there was a few of these that it had come up in. That is a more cut and dry case. Okay, so I'm going to get at that by actually looking at our QA file. So I'm going to go to my QA report. I'm going to go looking in my extensions. And okay, so this is the error that Lloyd was reporting. So this is the one we just looked at. Let's see if we can find straight into slicing. So ethnicity, no fixed address. So let's take a look at no fixed address real quick. And that one is here. Okay. So we've got a similar, oh gosh, of course I picked the same issue where we basically are slicing to express a data type choice. Let's take a look at ethnicity then. Well, we're nothing if not consistent. I can see the same approach has been applied here as well. We're saying effectively, we're not definitively saying only supply value coding. We're just only saying if you do supply value coding, follow these patterns and rules, and not providing an anchor for it. I've got 2 more minutes to find one that we might have used this a different way. Let's see if I can find it on a profile. Maybe it's just that we've applied this pattern on. Let's take a look at goal.
It may be that we don't need slice,
Yeah.
I think is the issue.
You have mentioned very clearly in the
Same
patient
here.
at the element level. So I agree with that. There is no need for slicing.
So if we were to remove the slice
No,
or
just the slice name,
oh, got it. Okay.
I think. Yeah, we still want to say. Do we want to say? Yeah, value coding. Have to have one of those. Only type code. Yeah, I think that's what we want.
So effectively, because of the min and the max, we're saying the only thing you can provide is this data type. We're just going about it in a roundabout way.
Yes.
All right, let me run the publisher and see if it renders the way we would expect it to render. So if we follow this pattern, we may potentially remove the error. Is this how we would actually want to most efficiently convey this constraint? Which is only supply coding, and if you supply coding, system is expected, code is expected. And I guess display isn't.
Feels like a pretty standard way of expressing a constraint.
Because we're going so far as to like put these additional conditional pieces into it. It just seems busy to me, but I'll take a look at how it builds. It may mean then if this renders the way that we want it to, then we'll update what's in the QA issue log to just indicate we're just removing the slice name. But I think it's probably valuable for us to go through it on the next profiling call so that we can confirm, you know, this isn't just a broad-based pattern, like that is what the choice that we're trying to convey here. So that we don't end up removing slicing where we actually want it. Does that seem fair?
I think it is a broad pattern. There is no need for slicing to do what you want to do.
For extensions and in the way that we've applied them.
Yeah.
That's my hope. We'd have to actually, yeah, I don't think there's any extensions where we actually have applied complex extensions, but we'll have a look and then hopefully we can make the change at all. Okay. I'm still running through, I don't know if folks want to stay on, but it may be another couple of minutes on this one. So I'll keep the issue open. If it takes a little bit longer, I'll just record kind of what the outcome is and a screenshot, and we'll see if this is the update that we want to use to clear out a number of these errors starting on the next call. Sound good for folks? I wish I had pulled out. I was really hoping actually to do a little bit more of a change, but I will take a look at what else we have in that space 2 Fridays from now.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks, folks. I'll stop the recording and